Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Election Day edition of the Lunchtime Learning webinar series. My name is Brendan Woodruff. I'm the Director of Sustainability at DEC, and we have a fantastic program for you here today. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First off, it is Election Day, so if you have not voted yet, there is still time. The polls are open till 9 o'clock tonight, and I put a link in the chat to the Board of Elections voter lookup, so you can find where your polling place is there. So make sure you get out and do your civic duty. And if you're in Ulster County, I'm very jealous of the sticker that you're going to get when you do vote, if you haven't already, because they're absolutely fantastic. So a couple housekeeping things before we get started here today. First is everybody is on mute when you enter the webinar. If you do have questions as we go along, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of them today, please type them into the chat box. We'll get to all of the questions at the end, so type them in and then we'll be able to get to those. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded and you can find the recording of it on the Green New York website afterwards. I'm going to put the link in the chat for that as well. And that also has our entire archive of Lunchtime Learning webinars as well. In addition, our next Lunchtime Learning webinar is going to be on Tuesday, December 13th. It's going to be the second in our quote unquote and you series with Executive Order 22 and you. So that's going to be a great one coming up as well. Again, that's on Tuesday, December 13th. So without further ado, we've got a fantastic program for you here today. This one has been requested for a while. I know a lot of people have questions about this. We've got Tom Higson, the Deputy Director of Federal Affairs at DEC, here to break down some of the content in the Inflation Reduction Act, since it is such a big piece of legislation. Just one note before we get started here today. A lot of this is still a work in progress. As many of us who've worked on regulatory programs and other things know, it takes time to really flesh out everything with a big piece of legislation. So Tom's going to be able to present as much detail as we have and some resources as well for where you can find additional updates in the future as they become available. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Tom.
Thank you so much, Brendan. It's great to be here. I love this series. I love being able to be a part of this. I want to thank you all for taking the time, especially on this busy election day and this busy season for all of us. Today we're here to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and you, which is a little bit different than what I'm used to when talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, right? But first I want to, before I introduce myself again, I just want to say thank you to all behind the scenes making this happen, getting WebEx to work, and a special thanks to Brendan, who has worked so hard in collaborating this effort. My name is Tom Hiskin. I am the Deputy Director of Federal Affairs at the Department of Environmental Conservation. And this should be fun, I think. Is everybody excited? Pin drops.
Yep.
So today we're gonna start with a little bit of an overview of what the IRA is, what it means, top-down approach. We're going to jump into an overview of some of the provisions of interest, which will be coming from sort of a process lens and coming from the perspective of the things that you should be thinking about and be aware of when you're digging through what happens at the end of the presentation, which is sharing some of the resources for you to keep apprised of all of those things going. And as a special note, of course, this information is for informational purposes. This is your placeholder, your introduction, and does not substitute for any expert tax advice in working and planning out with your planner going forward. So President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law on August 16th, 2022. It provides just shy of $370 billion for climate and renewable energy programs over 10 years. And I want to make a special note here that when we're thinking about this, it really is a 10-year plan. This combined with the CHIPS and Science Act passed this year, as well as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, otherwise known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was signed into law last November. It will exceed $500 billion in investment for climate and renewable energy over the course of this next and upcoming decade. So what does this landmark legislation really mean? Well, it covers every sector of society and it will impact every sector, everything that we see and interact with in our daily lives. Renewable and zero emission electricity, electric vehicles and clean transportation, as well as our building sector and electrifying homes. Clean energy manufacturing and supply chains, green hydrogen and industrial decarbonization. And with the heart at all of this is our priorities on environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. And this image on this slide, if you are following the Climate Action Council process, you'd be familiar with this slide. And of course, this is a great one to understand, every single block is $1 billion. There is a lot in this legislation. And certainly we don't have enough time to talk about all of it, but this is monumental and it can't go without overstating because it really will change everything that we see in society. Among the impacts in New York, this historic legislation, what it really means is lower energy costs for households and businesses, creating those manufacturing jobs for American workers. It makes energy more affordable. It makes the purchasing of energy efficiency appliances more affordable, making those upgrades at home and saving on utility bills. It prioritizes creating those good paying jobs across the renewable space, solar, wind, battery storage, and other clean energy industries, as well as providing tax credits, bonuses for businesses that pay prevailing wage. Delivers clean, secure, and a healthy future for our children and grandchildren, that next generation, by making those investments today and those new electric appliances and those upgrades to energy efficiency at home. In addition, we will see the benefits across all communities in New York when it comes to domestic manufacturing incentives and tax credits, electric vehicles, and the commercial building upgrades, as well as for our small businesses, making those investments in clean fleets and their as well. So I want to take a little bit of a moment to level set here because there's a lot in this. There's a lot to take in, and big numbers and big talk is part of it, but having an understanding of sort of where we are at in the process and having an understanding of sort of simplifying some of these bigger pools of money, I think is important. So there's three major pots if we're thinking about the funding levels in the IRA. You have tax credits, you have loans, and you have grants. And all of the funding that goes through the IRA is going to be deployed by our 8 federal agencies responsible. $271 billion out of the total funding in the IRA is in the form of tax credits. The finish line doesn't happen when that piece of legislation is signed into law. And thinking about it, if we're thinking about it in the analogy of the iceberg, there's a whole lot of work that goes into getting that legislation passed that we don't normally see. And the same is true after that legislation crosses through with the signature from our president. That really begins that kickoff, that process for engagement, stakeholder engagement, to be able to take those overarching programs and narrow it down and really define those specifics, define those aspects that are covered in each of the individual programs, doing the RFIs, some of which just completed for input on November 4th. Others are going to be going out, requests for information, extending into the beginning of next year. So many of the details, although we have sort of the top line right now, many of those details will be coming out of those processes. So now that we have talked a little bit about the big picture, we're going to dive into some of the tax provisions of interest. Section 13301. This is the extension, increase, and modifications of non-business energy property credit. This is the 25C, non-business. And as an overview, it extends and modifies the tax credit for qualified energy efficiency improvements made to a taxpayer's residence. It increases the credit rates and modifies energy efficiency standards over time, expands credit to include home energy audits. These are the things when we're talking about making investments at homes, water heaters, central AC. It also includes geothermal heat pumps based on Energy Star requirements over time. And of course, like it mentions here, what's new about this is it also includes those home energy audits. Section 13302 is the residential clean electricity credit. It extends and modifies tax credit for purchase of residential solar electric property, solar water heating property, fuel cells, geothermal heat pumps, small wind energy property, and qualified biomass fuel property. Adds qualified battery storage technology, which is also new for this program in the IRA. Section 13304. So the first two that I mentioned, these are tax rebate programs for those investments and those upgrades. Section 13304 is about a new home purchase. So this one extends and modifies the energy efficiency new home credit, increases the credit amount, and provides a larger credit if prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met for building that home. Allows credit for low-income housing tax credit recipients. Section 13404, the alternative fuel refueling property credit. This extends and modifies the tax credit for qualifying charging or alternative fuel refueling property at a business or taxpayer's principal residence. Is eligible charging or refueling property must be placed in service within a low income or rural census tract. This covers things when we're thinking about EV charging infrastructure at home, right, or at the business, like is mentioned. But it also includes bidirectional charging equipment upgrades. Section 13401 is the clean vehicle credit. This extends and modifies vehicle tax credits. Revised credit provides up to $7,500 for the purchase of fuel cell or eligible new plug-in electric vehicle that meets the requirements that are being worked through on critical minerals and battery components. And Section 13402 is the previously owned clean vehicles. It's a new credit, $4,000, limited to 30% of the purchase price for the purchase of previously owned plug-in electric or fuel cell vehicles. Excuse me. This is coming from the Congressional Research Service, entitled Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 Provisions Related to Climate Change, for your reference if you want to dive into deeper. I pulled out some of the things that are going to affect us as consumers, us as residents, and thinking about the next 10 years of upgrades in terms of energy efficiency improvements. But there's a long list there, so you can see the overviews from the other sections in that as well. Now, what we talked about is sort of, thinking about it from the lens of the individual in terms of the funding mechanism. There's also the formula grants that are provided to the state energy offices. And I wanted to highlight two of these, which are Section 50121 and Section 50122. New York's allocation for these two provisions is expected to exceed $300 million. So we have what's referred to as the Home Energy Performance-Based and Whole House Rebates Program. This is funding pools that go through the Department of Energy, and they are allocated by formula grants to NYSERDA as our state energy office to develop and implement a rebate program to homeowners and aggregators for whole house energy saving retrofits, and the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program to develop and operate high efficiency electric home rebates programs for appliance and non-appliance upgrades. Now, before I go to the next slide, I just wanted to make a note here. I'm going to show you some slides. There's a lot of words on this page. The third box, so the one all the way on the right, this is the 25C. This is the non-business rebate program that I mentioned earlier. And the two from the previous slide are on the left, just so we have clarity there. So these formula grant programs in the IRA For the first one, we have $4.275 billion total in the IRA, estimated $200 to $250 million to New York State. And so what this covers are basically the state programs for energy efficiency and electrification measures, including seal and insulation packages, heat pumps, high-performance water heaters, cooking appliance, and electrical service panel and wiring upgrades. Maximum rebate, $14,000 per home. The residential efficiency and electrification rebates, otherwise known as the homes. This is our upgrades on appliances, heating and cooling. And what's a little bit different about this particular program when you dive into the details of it is this is a performance-based program. So the better efficiency performance you can upgrade, the better that rebate is there, just to highlight that. And now at the bottom, when we're thinking about all of this legislation working together and including the Infrastructure Act, there's an additional $40 million in the IIJA to states that cover the cost of training and other drug here. Now to go back to the 25C, which is the non-business section, covers up to 30%, this is the one all the way on the right, up to 30% of the cost of materials and labor for selected energy efficiency and electrification measures. And it gives you an overview, including the air sealing, insulation, windows, doors, electrical upgrades, heat pumps, high-performance water heaters. So this is a lot. It's probably confusing. It certainly can be confusing. But the intent of the overview is to give you this in terms of the PowerPoint so that you understand the resources that we have available, you know where to look, and you know the sections that cover that will probably be of most interest to you. And those details will be worked out as we go ahead into the new year, 2023, as those programs continue their development. Now we're going to talk a little bit, switch gears, and we're going to talk about those resources so we can stay apprised of what those details will be coming out of. So first, and these links are in the chat as well. So cleanenergy.gov, this is going to house sort of the bigger overview. And it'll go into details about what's available, give you the overview of how you can save money, and talk about those additional resources that are available in the IRA, those programs, and where to find that additional information, a lot of which I pulled out here. We also have the Energy Star as a federal resource. I put two links in here. One is the federal tax credits, which gives you an overview of these changes, and they're going to be upgrading that or updating that website as new information comes out of these programs with more specifics, as well as the Energy Star Home Upgrade website. It talks a little bit more about products and it's more personal, so you can go through, as you can see in this image, the rebate finder, best value finder, and home advisor. Thank you, Brendan. Rewiring America, they created this IRA calculator, and they are partnering with the White House as well as a number of different organizations and businesses to communicate what's available and provide those resources to us as residents and consumers to understand what's in it, what the specifics are, and keep us apprised there. The IRS also has a couple of great websites for, the first is, where we're at right now, what it means for you, and sort of staying ahead of the game heading into 2023, as well as an overview of what will be coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act of 22 in terms of that program development. So these are two websites to stay apprised of as we move forward. Lastly, in terms of clean vehicle credits, we have a fueleconomy.gov, and this website is a great resource to identify the different types of vehicles available and how those vehicle purchases of used and new vehicles will work with the incentives in the IRA. And of course, a special thanks to our friends and partners at NYSERDA who have shared a number of information for this presentation, as well as offering a number of resources on their websites that helps consumers in New York State. And so that was the quick overview of where we are today. We talked a little bit about the provisions to highlight, and we talked about the resources that are available to stay apprised of information coming out of implementation in the IRA. So with that, let's get to some questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. That was a fantastic overview of everything here. And I think one of the things that you said that I think kind of really I want to kind of make a fine point on is just how transformational this legislation is going to be. When we talk about the clean energy transition that everybody's been talking about, this is where the rubber hits the road. And I think you're really going to see it accelerate in the next couple of years. We're already seeing, new manufacturing announcements around EV batteries, car assemblies for electric vehicles, critical mineral deposit things, and that sort of stuff. So, in addition to how it's going to affect us personally, I think just seeing that overall transformation, when you're reading the news, you're seeing other things and you're seeing a lot of these new announcements, the IRA is going to be what's behind a lot of that stuff. So getting into the questions here, the first is there anything in the IRA for people who rent in terms of either being able to use clean energy or appliance rebates or other things for renters in addition to homeowners?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a number of provisions that will cover, you know, the residents for which they're renting. So it'll benefit, of course, the building as a whole. I'm thinking about that in terms of investments over time and energy efficiency provisions there, as well as for renters if they own their appliances, they will be able to leverage the benefits as well.
Mhm. And the next question here, somebody mentioned that another section of the IRA involves new resources for the IRS, corporate tax rate changes, things like that. Is there anything in that IRS portion that involves climate or environmental initiatives?
I think I would need a little bit more specifics on that question, but it's something certainly we can follow up with. Is this Steve's question?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's something we can follow up on as well if folks have questions about that. So another couple questions that we have that came in here. One is, what are fuel cell vehicles? I can just take that one quick. So they're vehicles that run on hydrogen. There's a hydrogen fuel cell that creates electricity that charges batteries that then power the vehicle. And so the only input is that hydrogen. Right now, there's not a lot of fueling infrastructure out there for hydrogen, but it is an option. I know in California, there's some models that are for sale from a couple companies, and that's something that usually when you see EV tax credits, usually they also apply to fuel cell vehicles as well, because it is another zero emission technology. And another one here for you, Tom. Can you share what the tax credits are for commercial buildings, or do you have any links to more information for those?
For commercial buildings, yes. So if you my best recommendation would be to go through some of the resources that we presented here first. See if that covers your questions, depending on what you mean by commercial rebates. NYSERDA has a page for commercial entities which will cover some of the specifics of that unique to New York, and as well as some of the other guidance. Let me actually have to just go back. So Rewiring America will have some of those insights there. There are a number of different entities that have done their own analysis covering sort of the overview there. One example might be HK Law. You can Google the specific provisions if you're talking about energy efficiency or energy efficient commercial buildings deduction, I'll just put it into chat here.
Mhm.
It's the section 179D. And so you can search that and you'll be able to find more details on those commercial aspects.
Yeah. And another question here, are there any rebates for electric bikes in the IRA?
That's a great question. Oh, wow. Okay, well, we'll have to dig into that one a little bit and follow up. But I would start at the fueleconomy.gov website. And again, I just wanted to reiterate, a lot of these programs are still being worked out, right? So some specifics like that, it's not in the legislation that will necessarily define what that vehicle encompasses. It will be in the programmatic development. So leading into next year, there might be additional insights for how that might be defined and what types of vehicles it may impact there.
Mhm. Another question here, how can folks look up their area medium income? Do you know of any tools for that?
I'm talking on mute. I am sorry. That's a great question. There are tools. I'll have to find and follow up. Who asked that question? We'll
Yeah.
find and follow up
Yeah,
resources.
I can download the chat. So folks, one thing we'll do is type all of your questions in here. We'll save the chat and we'll work to get you some answers to those as well afterwards, if there's follow-up. Another question we've got here is, are the rebates and tax credits available January 1st? Is it better to wait until then to buy something like a heat pump or something? Or are there things that are available right now immediately?
Oh, that's a great question, and I think we'll probably take just a minute on this because I do want to reiterate this. Um, like we talked about in the presentation, this is long-term planning, right? And so where we sort of are in terms of IRA implementation is a number of these programs on the tax credit side are going to be updating or replacing existing programs. So depending on the types of programs that you might be referring to or looking into specifically, you personally, you want to check out these resources and make sure that it aligns with your planning, right? So some of these tax incentives, tax programs for this year are still the same. The IRA doesn't change that. And the implementation will happen for tax year 2023. So thinking about it back,
Mhm.
right?
Are there-
Leverage some of these resources and they'll be able to give you specifics, especially on the IRS for those updates.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of answers the next question in here as well. That was if any of these are retroactive. But you'll be able to find more of that information in the resources here. So another question that came in here is there any kind of central resource for applying for grants or loans or tax credit info? Is there going to be kind of like a one-stop shop website where folks could go? Or is it going to vary by program?
The one-stop shop aspect in terms of the overview is going to be your cleanenergy.gov. If you want to think about sort of the one-stop shop from a New York perspective, that will be NYSERDA resources. Thinking about that, I see another question about home energy audit. So NYSERDA has all of those resources on their website, including all of the contractors that they have vetted, and all of that is available on theirs for, in this case, the link that I sent is the residential aspect of their website.
Mhm. And do you know if there's been any thought put into supply chain issues? I know there's been a lot of anybody who's tried to buy an EV recently has probably run into this. And with the potential rush of folks when the tax credits kick in, there might be some supply issues there. Do you know if there's anything in the legislation or anything that's been talked about to alleviate that?
Certainly, combined investments are intended to bolster our supply chain. Many geopolitical aspects are going to be impacting that as well. But this falls into sort of the bucket of program development, right? So you initiate these programs, these aspects of the IRA, especially on the tax credit side, and when you're developing those programs, you're going through a very detailed aspect. So, you take one of these credits, let's say the non-business energy property credit. In terms of the process side and putting out those requests for information and feedback and lessons learned and all of that information that eventually goes into the, the actual nuts and bolts of the program from an implementation side. I mean, we're talking about pages and pages of guidance. Right. So all of these will get factored into how those programs get developed. And then over time, as you're going through this next decade of investment, each year, all of those things will get evaluated. And in terms of that specific question, that's where those reviews will happen each consecutive year. And hopefully, we're catering towards or making changes as those factors play a significant role in challenges.
Mhm. And there's a couple questions here about EVs and the EV tax credit, so I'll try and condense these into one here. The first is, with the passing of the legislation, there were some provisions that took place immediately involving what vehicles are able to get the credit based on, as you mentioned, where they're manufactured, whether it's in North America or not. Have you heard anything about legislation to update that in terms of, instead of having that immediate cliff now, as long as entities or companies are planning to build factories in North America, that they would be able to access the credit again? Has there been any talk of that?
There's a number of different provisions. I would say, there's a number of different aspects when thinking about all of the three major legislation working together in terms of that. It's tough to get into specifics now because, we all understand, and I think we've all probably experienced a number of those aspects having an impact on our own personal lives. And how that will play in and how that will actually be determined in terms of implementation may change as we go through this, as well as other and additional investments. But as an overview, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has a significant amount of investment in bolstering that manufacturing in the U.S. Ties into the supply chains. The CHIPS Act, of course, plays a significant role, especially with electric vehicles, and all of that will take time to make those investments happen. But in the meantime, we'll have to look and see what guidance comes out when they finalize these programs heading into next year and see what those real impacts are.
And one other question with that is, folks were commenting on the potential change of the credit being from a tax credit where you have to have tax liability to be able to take the full $7,500 to a point of sale rebate where the dealer would be able to take the tax credit. Do you have any additional information on that, or is that something folks should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, it's definitely something that you all should be on the lookout for. That is one key aspect of these, is that you have the dealer pass through, right? So you're not, in cases of that, you are getting the money back on the purchase as opposed to getting the tax credit after the fact. So those details will come out and they'll be posted with the finalized criteria for each of those. I know that there is a lot of specific concerns and specific questions. And the intention of this was sort of to provide a fairly stable or a fairly level playing field as an introduction. And there is no let's say, all of your questions are extremely, you're nailing it, right? Like these are the big things that everybody who's working on this implementation is trying to figure out and working through and designing for. And this process is not nearing completion, right? This is an iterative process that happens.
Mhm.
And so those things will be worked through. Hopefully you will, well, I guess the point of saying that is that, we're not facing an in terms of, this is the end. That's it. We're not going to look and revisit these programs. Um, you know, these are things that are going to be continued to work through.
Well, it sounds like you're foreshadowing a sequel to this webinar. You back next year. Um, not
We're going to
to,
need a panel for these folks.
yep. So folks, if you do have any more questions, type them into the chat box here. One final question here from me. What provision are you most excited about in the IRA, and what do you think is going to have the largest impact?
Oh, wow. That one might be the hardest question of all. It's really hard to say. When you're thinking about, the real intent of this presentation was to be thinking about sustainability in our lives and thinking about residents and consumers. And so it's hard to really nail a specific provision that goes without, the adjacent provisions. I think what's probably most exciting is that not only is this a piece of legislation and there are real tangible things that are going to impact society and kind of take us to that next level, but working in tandem, the biggest thing that impacts me is thinking about the scale of this investment. You know, regardless of controversy or opinions, what this really means is a significant change. And passage of this legislation and the Infrastructure Act and the CHIPS Act is really saying, what can we do as society together? What can we do with the right investment in the right places together? And what is that going to look like over 10 years is not a long amount of time. And seeing all of those different factors and different aspects of society and different investments, whether it's us as individuals or whether it's us in our communities or whether it's us as a state government and our interactions with our federal counterparts, or whether it's us as a nation. I mean, this is something that we haven't experienced before in terms of this scale of investment. And I think the thing I'm most excited about is to really see that change in society over this next decade and beyond.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think for myself, I'll be corny here, but with all of these consumer rebates and programs that we're talking about here, I always enjoy when I have coworkers come up to me and say, "Oh, I got this new heat pump system, or I got a new EV, or I got this new heat pump hot water heater, or whatever the technology is." And people always have this big smile on their face because A, they're being part of the solution, and B, it's just good. Like, this technology works really well, and we're making it more uh, accessible to everyone. So, it's going to create a lot of people who are able to access this technology and tell others how fantastic it is. So, um, that's what I'm really looking forward to with it and excited about is more of those interactions of people being part of the solution. Um, so what we're going to do here at the end, we've got all of the questions in the chat here. We're going to download those. If there's any we need to follow up on, we'll get you resources there. If you haven't checked the chat yet, take a look there. There's a lot of links there. The recording of this will be available up on the Green New York website afterwards. And if anybody does need a specific link or something, put it in the chat here, what you're looking for, and we'll get you an email after this as well. So any final thoughts, Tom, for our audience today?
Thank you all, and this is really just the beginning. So your questions are important, but most importantly is keep pushing on those. I will not be able to answer all of these questions, but there, as more comes out, you know, we will have those resources to offer and get those questions answered. So take this as sort of the beginning and sort of a beginning resource for next steps in terms of your planning and all of those questions. And thank you for part.
Yeah. We look forward to having you back when we have more information. Sounds like you just walked right into that one. All right, everybody. So thanks a lot for joining today. Again, this is a really exciting topic. It's uplifting, it's hope, it's optimism. Let's take it, let's run with it, and let's get as much as we can out of it. So thank you very much, and we'll follow up with any follow-ups. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll see you next month.